Hi, welcome to another episode of the Chamber Chala. My name is Trinidad Aguirre, and I'll be your host for today. And I have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Phillip Vasquez. And Phillip, I'm so glad that you're here today to join me on today's podcast event. Just a quick bio on Phillip. He has over 25 years of material management experience in developing cost-effective contract strategies. He has a BA from OSU, Oklahoma State University, and he has directed major technology procurements, major cooperative contracts, and construction contracts, really managing a portfolio of over $500 million in purchasing contracts with various programs. He's collaborated with several different organizations, best practices. He's worked for the City of Dallas, Region 4 Education Service Centers, Collin College, and several private companies. And in his spare time, he is able to also give back to the community. Youth activities, including the Carrollton Farmers Branch Youth Soccer Association, Boy Scouts of America, and as a high school youth leader at his church. Where do you find the time, Phillip, for all of that? That is quite a mouthful.
Well, I have a wonderful wife, and she really supports me in everything we do. And we do a lot of things together. We do Boy Scouts together, soccer we did together, and even at the church, we work with the kids together. And so it's a partnership, and having the right partnership makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. And if I may ask, how big is your family?
We have 3 children. One of them teaches in Broken Arrow School District outside of Tulsa. The other one, she's self-employed, and she works for an estate sale company. And then I'm an 18-year-old son who graduates from high school this year. So they're all different ages.
Busy household, no doubt.
Well, it is, but we just didn't want to have all the kids in college at the same time.
There you go. So I needed to follow that. I have 2 that are going to be overlapping, but we'll get through that.
Well, my parents had 3 kids in college at the same time. Then my mom went back to school. But she stopped at her associates. So
there you go.
She just wanted to prove to us that she could do it.
Oh, good for her. So tell me, what is it that you're doing today?
Well, right now I have a small business. It's a government services company in which I work with local governments, and I also work with small businesses or large businesses and help them navigate the process of doing business with local governments, because it can be a complicated process, and especially the way things have changed. But over the years, everything changes, and the one constant in the world today is change. So.
Well, explain to me. So you said it's changed, and what are some of the major, from back when you started over 25 years ago to now, what are some of the major changes that you experienced in your particular industry?
Well, years ago when I was the director of purchasing in Dallas County, we used to mail bids out to everybody. I mean, actual physical bids. If we had 40 vendors on our bid list, we would send out 40 bid packets. That's a big postage bill. And so, because the only way people knew about the bids was in the newspaper advertisement. And then if they registered to receive bids, we would send them bid notices or the bid packets when they came out and stuff. And they gave them opportunities to bid. And then we also, for small procurements, there was a rotating vendor list in which, we would contact X number of vendors depending upon the size of the procurement for small dollar purchases of less than $15,000 and stuff. And so that was kind of a process in which those purchases were rotated. We would contact vendors, and keeping track of that was all paper, very labor intensive. Sure. And over time, when I was leaving Dallas County, we moved towards e-procurement. We started posting bids online, and if someone wanted something, we would let them download it through a PDF file and stuff. And so suddenly, we started just mailing a postcard out, and that saved us money. And then later, that somebody made the decision, well, we'll just email people notices if they have an email address, and make a decision that that's how we're going to do business. And so things started moving electronically. And when I left the county, it was in 2005, and things were just beginning to change in that direction. And so, in fact, the City of Dallas made changes, and that's why I noticed the changes were happening when I left the City of Dallas years ago, is that they were moving towards everything to become a portal type basis that the city was hosting. But now cities are getting away from hosting those things, and now they're going to third parties to host those platforms and stuff.
So the core of your business is to help navigate that sounds like already complex system.
It does. And then but then also for local governments when they have complex procurements to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've worked with technology procurements for a long time, and but also at one point I was helping local government analyze the benefits of possibly outsourcing their facilities maintenance operations. And we went through the entire process, and we actually discovered it would be cheaper. Then so some of the older employees all retired, and suddenly it became cheaper to keep it in-house because, you're hiring new employees at a lower cost. And
right.
so, but I don't know if it was more efficient or not because you lose institutional knowledge, but at the same time, though, sometimes it's good to have people looking at things differently, new people coming in with new ideas. And so they were really happy with that process and stuff. And so, I really believe that local governments can benefit from public-private partnerships, I call them,
mm-hmm.
through privatization initiatives. In fact, the city of Dallas actually has a privatization committee, which they analyze different things. I know when I worked there, they considered privatizing the vehicle maintenance, and then they discovered, they could have saved a little bit of money, but for what they would have saved and what they would have lost with the equipment and everything and the knowledge, it would have been made very difficult for them to go back and do that again. Just like when cities privatize their garbage collection.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that it's good for people to look at those things. Now, there's some things that make good sense, like most places now have private companies to clean their buildings.
Right.
Instead of hiring someone on staff that sits there and waits for something to happen.
Correct.
So
do you, as an example, like for facility management is what you're talking about. So are you involved with helping companies, like younger startup companies, like say, I have mm-hmm. this process, but I just simply don't know how mm-hmm. to go through that. Can you explain, like, what are some of the things that smaller companies should be thinking about?
Well, I'll use an example. There was a small elevator company that started up in Fort Worth, and they acquired the assets of other smaller companies, but they had trouble understanding the government business, and so I did workshops with them. Then I helped them work on several different bids, and to get their feet on the ground to be able to do that. And but a lot of it is just paper forms. Even though the forms are electronic, people still have to complete them and submit them electronically. Although sometimes they have some places you complete the forms online, you complete it differently. Sometimes it's you print the form, you do it, then upload it. Other times you can they're interactive forms. And so, but like I said, it's all becoming more electronic. In fact, counties nowadays have the ability to tell bidders that they have to submit it electronically under a law that was passed a couple of years ago. But they have to provide a means for vendors to come on site and submit an electronic bid. Well, and many people, how if someone's interested in applying for a job,
right?
They don't fill out applications anymore. They go into the little HR office, and there's a computer there. They sit in and they look for jobs and apply. Same process.
Is there a particular industry that you really focus in on or hone in on, or is it pretty much,
Well, the spectrum's all over the place.
Right.
I mean, I worked with a lot of different organizations. Some of the people I've worked with in the past, people who did business with county clerks, project that I did not too long ago was to benefit jails in small counties and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I'm constantly looking for areas that are underserved and trying to figure out how to help those people, become more successful, because my goal is to help them add more value to their taxpayers.
Right.
And on the flip side, for vendors to be able to compete on that, more competition means better value for the tax dollars too.
Right.
Because sometimes, and it is a complicated process for people to do business. One question I always get asked is that, how do I do it? And I said, well, who do you want to do business with? I want to do business with the city. I said, okay, so you go to the city website. He goes, okay. Well, does that information get transferred to the county and the school district? I said, no, you have to register to each and every one of those. So it's a complicated process, in terms of trying to figure out who you're going to do business with. And because of that, some of the school districts banded together to form a buying cooperative in which, everyone participates in each other's bids, and they publish it, and they say who all the school districts are and what their suggested usages is. And so people can bid on that together. And that's really one of the areas in which you call group purchasing. It's what I call the Costco version for school districts.
Sure. So you're really, in a sense, providing a roadmap for companies to really navigate. So these are the waypoints, if you will. Turn left here, turn right here, fill out these forms. And how much of the personal relationship. We talked a little bit about that. Is there today versus, because now with the electronic mediums, are those personal relationships valuable, or are they not as?
Well, they're not as valuable for people who are getting started. People who have the relationships established, it's still valuable. I know a lady who works for a medium-sized city in which she prefers people just to email her with questions and stuff. She doesn't want people coming in to see her. And that was before the pandemic.
Oh,
and so, but that was, but she functions that way because she wants to be efficient and effective. She doesn't want to waste her time. And so that's a good thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, sometimes asking a question in person, it creates collaboration like what we're doing today. We're collaborating and you actually get to a better answer. And so instead of going back and forth with questions and stuff, and that's what I find. But now with the technology nowadays, when you have a question, governments have always had a process where you submit a question and then they're all answered at one time. Now you can submit those questions and they're all grouped together and everyone sees the questions. And so, and that's always good. Because I always tell people, if you have a question, ask it, because there's probably somebody else out there who has the same question and they're afraid to ask it.
Right.
And so you gather information and information is good for everybody. It provides a positive outcome. And I used to have a thing in which I call a level playing field. Now, I don't know if it's not a legal term. It's just, but the goal is to provide a level playing field for people to participate in business. And the big pushback in the early 2000s, late 90s and on into 2010 was to take a large procurement and break it up in a way in which smaller companies could bid on it. And that's still a challenge to do that. And with technology now, it's real easy for people to forget. It's real easy for people to lump it all together and, winner take all.
Right.
And that's good because the city might get a good price, but it could be, though, that there might be small businesses in those certain areas. Like an example would be, we were doing for janitorial service for the city. And so we broke up all the different recreation centers in different areas. And, some small businesses in those areas got the business, and where larger companies got the business in some of the bigger buildings and stuff. And so it gave people opportunities to grow their business at the same time but if a small business bid on a big project, many governments wouldn't award it to them anyway, because they were worried about their ability to be able to actually perform.
Sure.
And many times they would want to look at finances and be able to carry a cash carry and employees, whether they could hire enough. And they don't want to go through the process of having to replace the vendor and have the vendor hurt, financially. Sam Walton used to have a deal in which he wouldn't do business with a company in which they had to provide him with their books to show that his business didn't represent more than 20% of their revenue, because he did not want to put them out of business. Now, current Walmart may not do that. I don't know, but that was one of the things that Sam Walton did.
Yeah.
And so, governments don't also want to help grow local businesses too. And that should be their mission, because that's local taxpayers too, in many cases.
Right.
And so, but it's a maze, and different agencies have tried to figure out how to collaborate and, to try to make it easier for local governments. And what they've done is like in Cullen County, they have the Cullen County Purchasers Forum, where they have a meeting every year, which all the agencies in the area come to participate and tell people how to do business with all the agencies in the county. And it's all different, but yet at least people have a forum in which they can go and do that. And so that the chairperson of that person changes. The last one I remember was Dan Ford from Frisco. He was the chair, and I think it's been moved 2 times since then.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just don't keep up with things anymore.
What are some of the best practices for companies as they're thinking about going and doing bidding, especially on some of these bigger projects?
Well, one of the best practices, if you want to bid for business, a good thing to do is to gather information and see if you can get information about who was the vendor, who was the previous bidder, who was awarded contracts. Under the Texas Open Records Act, you can ask for that. Now, they can charge you so much a page to print it out for you, but sometimes people will waive that, and so it just depends. But it's just gathering information. But remember, though, that was the last procurement. This next procurement might be different, and so But, it's to be competitive. You have to understand what the current market is. And if you're in business, you know what the current market is generally, what the cost for services.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I think local businesses have over bigger companies is that they have the opportunity to provide value service. And like small office supplies companies are starting to gain traction again, versus the Office Depot. I'm not knocking them; they're a good company, or Staples, but which I think is great because people can go in there and get what they want. It's just that smaller businesses are focused on creating a value proposition to get people what they need and help them get things. I mean, I know when I was working at Cullen College, they worked with a local vendor in Plano who would actually come out and do measurements and everything. But that was a company that had been awarded a contract. And
well, my question is then, so how does a small business, so on a major project, as an example, prevent them to be competitive in that market where obviously a larger vendor could provide value as a greater, I guess, value, if you will, because they have economies of scale, whereas a smaller may have to charge a little bit more just to kind of, get the job done as appropriate. So can you walk me through some of those advantages and disadvantages of something like that?
Well, and that's always a challenge, but sometimes the smaller businesses can actually do it cheaper. It just depends upon how they approach the marketplace. Now, they may not pay their employees as much. They may not have the same benefits package. But some of the organizations are changing those requirements too. The city of Dallas passed an ordinance a number of years ago. A friend of mine, Mike Frost, was the purchasing director then, in which they wanted the city vendors to pay a living wage to their employees. And by doing that, though, it actually made it more competitive. Whereas, this is what you have to pay people for certain types of things, whether it be security guard services or janitorial. Those people are getting a better wage. It's not tremendously high, but it's not minimum wage. And so because of that, though, things have gotten more competitive. And I think more and more you're going to see things like that happening, especially with changes that are happening in the workforce where workers, I'm not going to say they're banding together, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that they're getting fair value. And so,
do you think that COVID has accelerated that thought mentality?
Oh, absolutely. We've gone through what's called the Great Resignation twice now, and where people have just quit their jobs in mass amounts, trying to figure out how they can do things themselves. Some of them started their own businesses. I think that's interesting. In fact, my own daughter started her own business, and she came to me and asked me for advice and stuff. And I told her to go. I will say, there are resources out there for people who are starting businesses and learning to do things. The Bill Priest Institute at the Dallas County College District is a great place to go, where they do free training down there for small businesses and stuff. I think Cullen College may have one too. I just don't know for sure. And probably many of the community colleges have an organization like that because a lot of it's funded by the federal government. Because the goal, incubation of small business is the key. I'll say this because most of the population works for small businesses of under 500 people. So that's, the goal is to provide more opportunities for that. That's the whole reason why the Small Business Administration was created back in the 1930s.
So when you add value from a small business perspective, what are some of the value propositions that you can expect versus your big box? Because you mentioned...
Well, here's the thing. Many of the agencies nowadays have gone to proposals instead of low bid.
Got it.
And with the proposal, they ask you all these questions and they ask for information, and then they evaluate the proposal that's submitted to provide the service or the product that they're trying to provide for you. And in some cases, there are even opportunities to add value-added things, like to make your proposal better. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people do that, and they're successful in gaining the business. But it's good to have a partner to do that. And sometimes it's having the right sales force, and sometimes it's having resources like the Chamber of Commerce to help people out. And those are all good resources, and people forget about the resources that are available to them when they're in business. I mean, I had to remember that, even though I used to do training for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the chamber, how has the chamber helped you expand your respective company? And is it better for more of an exposure, developing those key contexts? Can you elaborate a little bit?
No, absolutely. Any networking is a key part of any business. You want to network with as many people as you can because you might find people that you can partner on projects with. And that's a key component. Sometimes bigger companies will be looking for partners to do projects.
Mm-hmm.
I know in construction, they do it all the time. They're always looking for good partners to work as their subcontractors, but I call them partners,
Right.
To help them on projects. Because, many of the large construction companies don't self-perform everything. And that's a big thing right now. You're seeing more and more construction happening. I mean, when I left the college, they were doing $200 million in construction for new campuses and stuff. And you're going to see more and more renovations going on too.
Right.
Organizations that are renovating buildings and stuff. City of Dallas, not City of Dallas, Dallas ISD, they bought a building that used to be run by the old affiliated computer services company. I think it's on Harwood Street and right off 75, and they remodeled it that's their headquarters now. So, somebody had to go in there and do all that. And some company had to go in there and renovate it. And then even during the pandemic, things changed for people because the schools, the ones that weren't technology prepared, suddenly had to find ways of doing that. And so many of them went to group purchasing organizations, or in some cases they went to large companies to provide some of that stuff, only because of the emergency need. But as time changed, people started looking at how they could do things better. Like, for instance, if you were buying a bunch of computers from a company, a large company, those large companies have service companies underneath them that are trained to do warranty work and everything. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of ways you can partner with them. And, like Dell has their certified partners. One of them's a minority company based in Carrollton to work on their computers. And even though they manufacture their own computers, they're also certified to do warranty work for Dell. And I use that as an example. Mm-hmm. And so, and I see more and more people possibly getting back into value-added resellers in the computer business. Because if you're reselling computers, you're going to do the installation and do the warranty and service work for them. There's some value in that. In fact, City of Dallas did that and went with Dell computers, but they had Xerox install them all. But they had a subcontractor install them. And so, I mean, it's a chain reaction. They call it the supply chain.
Sure.
But in the service industry, supply chain is a little different. It's trying to figure out how to get into it. But it all goes back to networking and relationships. And sometimes it's somebody that you worked with 5 years ago, keeping up with them, and they find out they're doing something. Hey, how can we work together on stuff? And I know people don't think about it, but would you rather work with somebody that you know and trust versus somebody that you hope to be able to get to know?
100%. So when you submit your bid, can you tell me on the other end of that? So as a company, I'm doing that, but who are the folks making the ultimate decision?
Well, generally there's a team that evaluates the proposals. If it's a proposal, if it's a bid, there'll be one team evaluates price, but the rest of the team evaluates whether or not what's being bid on is compliant and the vendor can be responsible and perform. But if it's a proposal, there'll be a team that will be evaluated, and the scoring criteria has to be included in the proposal, mm-hmm. and they cannot deviate from that unless they do an addendum to the bid while it's still active. They can't change it once the bid's closed. They have to actually evaluate with the criteria, and the criteria that they have to follow is mandated by state law. And so they have to publish it.
So when you look at it, there are certain criteria that they, I would say, lack of better words, bonus points. So, for example, female-owned companies, mm-hmm. veteran-owned companies, minority. Are those taken into consideration? And is there a certain percentage that need to be awarded to?
Well, most places don't have, and the local government have set-asides. The federal government does have set-asides for things. But even with federal funds, they look at different things from anything from a minority certified company to a small business certified company. It depends upon, what area they're in. I remember DFW Airport was looking for small business certified companies at one point. And they were having to go all the way to Waco and Austin to find them because for the niche business they were looking for.
Sure.
And that's the key thing is niche businesses. Some of those things are, that aren't big, well-known things, and you have to have certain expertise to be able to do or be able to be part of the supplier network.
Is there a certain type of process that a to be like a small business certified, right? So obviously they all get their LLCs or what have you, right? But is there a certain certification that one has to go out and?
Well, there are different certifications.
Okay.
One of them is the state of Texas has what's called a historically underutilized business program, and it's run through the state controller's office. And when you go and register your business there, you can register there and submit your paperwork to get your certification there. And many agencies accept that. Not all of them do. Some do their own certification. I think the City of Houston does their own certification. I don't know for sure, but at one point they did. And some of them go through the North Central Texas Regional Certification Agency, which is in Arlington. And that's an organization that was created, and in a lot of the cities, are members of that, and they accept that certification when they're going through scoring. Now, how many points they give for that, it varies depending upon the agency and what's been approved by their governing board. And so sometimes it's just a matter of whether or not they completed the forms properly. Sometimes it's whether they're certified or not. I know Dallas County used to, when I was there, I don't know how they do it now, but they used to give so many points to a minority vendor, and the attorney said they could do it, so they did. But I don't know if attorneys change and things change, so I can't say that's how they do things now.
Sure.
So it varies from agency to agency. That's why I said it's kind of a, once you're looking at those things, and the best thing to do is many of those agencies have that information on their websites. Mm-hmm. When you're interested in looking at, pull up their purchasing webpage, and they'll have information of question and answers. That then they'll even have, some cases you'll be able to find the purchasing procedures. Or I know there was a time period when I was working with Ellis County down in Waxahachie. They actually had their whole purchasing manual on their website for people to look at. And now they revised it since then because they've changed purchasing agents since then. And so, that's the other thing, though, is when people change, that's an opportunity for you to go, when you find out that the people who are running the purchasing processes for these agencies, it's a good time to reintroduce yourself to whatever meetings and that are being hosted, or whether trade shows or whatever, because that's an opportunity for change.
Right. So if I go and if my bid isn't, or my proposal is not accepted, do they give you feedback on where you scored or what you could improve on? So maybe the next bid I can shore that up.
Well, most of the time you can get a copy. Most of the time you can get the rating system of how your scores came out.
Sure.
It depends upon the type of procurement. If it's a sealed proposal, sometimes there's a process that you have to go through to get that information. Mm-hmm. But some agencies actually do debriefings. Some don't. It just, like I said, it goes from one to the other. I used to have informal debriefings with companies as to, where they were weak in, only to help them understand the process. Some people don't want to do that because they're afraid of litigation and other things. And so,
in your company today, do you offer that service for folks to?
Yeah. Well, when I'm working with a client, with a vendor client, I'll follow them through the whole process and try to get information as to where they fell down. But the biggest thing I found, though, is when people are putting the pricing together, many times vendors I've helped to do that, they don't always factor in their costs properly. Uh-huh. And so, you have to make sure you've covered all your overhead. You have to factor a lot of that stuff in, like anything from the insurance requirements. Because most local governments, if you're going to be on site, require you to have actual workers' compensation insurance, not the alternatives that companies are able to have under the law of Texas. And I think that's good. People are able to do that, but governments have gone through processes which they require it because, like for instance, when I was at the city of Dallas, a company let their workers' comp policy lapse, and the city had to pay those claims many years ago, back in the late 90s. Mm. It was millions of dollars.
Absolutely. So now, you're providing that expertise to kind of help them understand what's all required, right? Because,
well, it is. And I've done workshops on it too for that in the past for vendors, but many of the local governments, if they're doing their jobs right, they should be doing workshops for you. In fact, there's a program called the Achievement and Excellence in Procurement Award, which local governments that are following best practices, they should be meeting with vendors at least once a year to do training on how to do business with the government. They should have a manual or something published, or a guide published on their website or handed out to local businesses to help them navigate those some of those shortfalls and stuff. And so, and even as to who handles what type of procurement, because some agencies have it by where their purchasing staff support different departments. Other agencies have it where they support the entire agency, but on certain type of commodity purchases. But all that should be published on the website. And I say that, but I'm seeing more and more where that's not happening anymore. And the reason why is because apparently now people are using that information fraudulently to issue fraudulent purchase orders.
Oh my goodness.
And so nowadays I'm seeing it where they're putting less and less of who the actual people are. They just list the commodities and stuff, which is okay.
Right. So really it goes back to, the vendor. It's incumbent upon the vendor to go and find the data, to find out when these workshops are being scheduled, getting down the proper guides and materials, and of course what type of proposals or bids that are out there, so then they can follow through the process.
Right. And there are even bid notification services out there in which you can pay a fee to get notified of bids and stuff, either locally or nationally. And more and more, that service is becoming a bigger, more important thing. Now, all that is a notification service. It doesn't help you prepare it. And sometimes it's valued, sometimes it doesn't. But, the big concern, though, that I see with the electronic process is that sometimes you get notified of bids for commodities you don't sell. And so you create a spam filter in which when something does come up that you might toss it away in your junk email.
Right.
And so, because, it's hard for those agencies sometimes to even figure out what commodities to use. Some of them use their own homegrown commodities.
Right.
There's a standard called the NIGP standard. Then there's the NAICS standard. And there's other standards that are out there, depending upon the agency and how they function. I think City of Dallas uses the NIGP standard, and other agencies, sometimes they create their own just based upon what their purchases are, because it costs money to use one of those.
Yeah, those services,
right.
Absolutely. So they're trying to
save money.
Yeah, you're trying to eliminate some expense, and that's probably one of the key things that they can live without.
Well, they think they can,
sure.
But those are good though when it comes to if agencies should be doing spend analysis every so often.
Yeah.
And that's becoming the next big thing, is that with electronic purchasing, you're able to do spend analysis to see how you're spending money, and then figure out how can you better purchase those things. And you'll see more and more people looking for strategic purchasing skills. I've seen that happening already, where people who used to be clerks are now actually considered professionals. And so, and there's actually certifications that they go through. I have my certified public purchasing buyer certification. I haven't set for the test for the CP certified professional purchasing officer. And I may not. But it's important though for agencies to have those, and if a lot of their staff has those, and those people are usually fairly knowledgeable about what they're doing, and they're willing to help people.
So let me shift gears. So we talked about COVID a few minutes ago. So what's your outlook on that? Do you feel that we should continue to see an uptick in renovations, as an example? Because I know right now, with the Great Resignation and whatnot, this work from home seems to be in high demand. Mm-hmm. And some folks are reluctant to go back in the office. So do you feel that?
Well, with governments, though, they have to provide the services. And in many cases, they have to provide the services in person.
Sure.
Now, some may not want to, but they should. And so because of that, you're going to see changes in the workforce. I know some buildings where they used to have a lot of cubicles, they started putting walls up because, to keep the rooms more self-contained, because of spreading of germs. You're going to see more of that happening. And then, but you're also going to see HVAC renovations where they're going to go in there and put in, there's certain equipment out there that sends it through a UV filter, or I don't know the technology behind it, but in which it kills germs as it goes through the process while it's reconditioned. The air is being reconditioned, whether it's heat or cold or whatever. It goes through the process. which it kills the germs that are through the intake or the outtake or something.
Right.
Again, I'm not an engineer, and I don't play one on TV. So
yeah, but we do believe that we'll still see that demand.
In fact, a friend of mine works for the Catholic schools, and they were able to get their schools renovated faster because they don't have the same type of bid process. And they went in there and they had a lot of them redone and retrofitted to make the air cleaner and with less germs and more. And I'm seeing more and more school districts and other agencies looking at doing that when they go to do a renovation. That some of them aren't just doing it now, but when they go to do a renovation, they're adding certain things in there because they're looking at the safety of the buildings and stuff. And I think you're going to see more and more where people are going to be more concerned about that. And, in terms of funneling things in, let people being let into buildings and stuff.
Correct.
And so, in some cases it's good, some cases it's not so good. It just depends upon, to what extent things go in equilibrium. They swing one way and they swing the other way.
Sure. Do we see an uptick in terms of, so speaking purely on the government side, between local, state, and federal, do we see a pretty even distribution, or is one more in demand than the other? Does that make sense?
Well, the federal government started with the money first, and so they were able to do things right away. Then they funneled the money to the local agencies. In fact, there's still some COVID money out there that people are spending, but and some of them, in some cases, they're repurposing the money from what the original intent was, but they have to go to the grantee to do that. And so it just depends upon
whatever it is.
Right. And so, but, the pandemic, although it's not over, it has been resided by different things and stuff. And the number of cases has gone down. But the goal, though, is that people are now concerned about future cases, and that may or may not happen. And as a society, that's kind of how we do things. Right after 9/11, everything went towards public safety. All the money that was being spent was making buildings more secure. And then, like when I was at Dallas County, we suddenly started looking at securing the buildings to where you didn't have centralizing the points of access,
right,
and stuff because of that 9/11, and then we went away from it. Now we can see that going back into effect again, and so it's kind of a pendulum in which how things go. But having an access point for buildings isn't a bad thing because that way you can get people to the right place,
right,
and that's always a good thing.
So it sounds like a pretty healthy swath across industries, especially at the government level, because we just touched upon how many different industries that could potentially be very, benefit from from the pandemic, if there is such a thing. Saying that with
but even office supplies,
right.
You're seeing people continue to need things to make sure that sanitation things are clean, like hand sanitizers are available, and you're going to continue to see things like that happening. But you're also going to see in the future, you're going to see devices being put in schools in which, right now they have cameras in schools, but, there's the ability to put infrared devices to see who's running a fever. I don't know if people want that or not, but they'll be available.
Sure.
I did help do a pilot program once for a school district in Central Texas, I'll say, and we put RFID chips in people's students' IDs because the district wanted to see what would happen. Well, so they tracked, and they turned out that that a lot of kids were in school that were being counted absent, and so that helped the school districts get more money from the state. But they just happened not to be in the right room.
Yeah.
Well, they might be staying after class to finish up a project or something, or another teacher asked them to help them with something, and it just said they were being counted absent when they probably shouldn't have been. And so it was an interesting exercise, but then parents were upset about the fact that people were tracking their children.
Of course.
And so privacy is a big deal too. So, you got so many factors to look into, things as to what people want. And that changes depending upon the situation. I was at a school board meeting recently, and there was two different sides of people. One people wanted masks to be worn, and the other side didn't.
Right.
And so it's just it goes back and forth, and so it's just that's the neat thing about our society is that people have the ability to say those things and focus on those things.
Right. And to your point earlier regarding, the niche industry, right? There's a various amount of niches, and it's just, again, finding the resources and the websites that may or may not call upon your services. And then going back and you're really providing them a really instructional roadmap on how they need to proceed so they can win or lose.
Right. And the thing is, if they really want to get into the business, I would focus on one or two agencies, local governments, and focus on seeing how they're doing business now and getting to know how they do business, and before you start submitting proposals. That way, you'll have but it's money that it's hard to invest in because you're busy trying to earn a living,
right?
And you say, "Oh, this bid just came up. Let's go bid on it." Well, in my experience, most of the people, when that happens, they don't get the business. Usually, you have to do your homework. It's like, you have to study, prepare. When you take your test, you'll do better.
Right.
And so it's the same thing in business, is you have to do your homework and understand what your market is, and then how to go about after it, and then follow your marketing business plan. And, and it's hard to do, I know, but it's sometimes the neat thing about a business plan, though, is you can change it.
Sure.
And, because life changes.
It's not set in stone.
Right. But it's basically a map, and sometimes the map doesn't work, so you change your destination.
What's the average time spent on a proposal or bid? Like, are you talking week, months?
Well, they're required by law to allow 2 weeks from the time it advertises before they're due. Complex ones could take anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, but they have to give you the time to do it. Now, that's one thing I've noticed, that when somebody issues a proposal that's really complex and only lasts 2 weeks, that means that, they're in a short time crunch. Mm-hmm. And there's possibly, they've already identified vendors out there that could bid on it. Not because they've reached out to them, they've done their research, is what I'm saying.
Sure.
Not that, that anything's wrong, it's just that they've already done research. And they have a short time crunch.
And now, not necessarily you're going to lose on the bid, but they have experience in this type of niche.
Well, I always tell people when they're doing a proposal, buyers, that they should know who the sellers are.
Right.
And you should do your research ahead of time. That way you know who the likely proposers are, and you have experience. And the thing is about government folks is that they talk to each other, since it's not a competitive environment like the private sector.
Sure.
And they say, "Oh, well, I only paid this much for that product." And I go, "Oh, cool." Well, then you look at what they required from you. And they go, "Oh, well, no, we're not going to pay that much. We're going to pay more." And they go, "Why?" Because we require more service than what you required.
Got it.
And my attorney wouldn't let me waive this or something. And that's a sad thing, is because, sometimes you can't compare apples to apples like that. Because sometimes the requirements are, you might think the differences are not very much, but sometimes it's enough. You've got a risk manager and someone over there analyzing profit and loss, saying that one little clause could put them at risk because they want to charge more for that risk. And so it's hard for companies to do business with government. But to be honest with you, right now, local governments spend a lot of money. I think it's like several $1 trillion. Mm. And it's only going to grow, especially where we're at right now. We're sitting in McKinney, Cullen County. The population here is growing tremendously. I remember Cullen County only had a population of 200,000 people. Most of them were in Plano. Now there's so many other communities that are reaching a large size of the population.
So, Phil, this has been an outstanding conversation and really helping me. So, quickly tell me, how can people get in hold of you? Like, if they're interested in understanding, this navigational system getting through.
Well, my suggestion would be for them to contact the chamber, and that they'll have information on how to reach me, because I'm on the go a lot, and right now my organization is just me, because I like it that way, and I'm able to provide valuable service just because I know what kind of service people are going to get, and so as I said, you all have the information. Plus, you should always value the resources of the chamber anyway, because the chamber is full of resources. So.
I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thank you, Philip, for such an engaging conversation today. I really appreciate all the knowledge that you imparted. I learned so much. And my name is Trinidad Aguirre. Again, this is the Chamber of Charla here with Phillip Vasquez, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you letting me come, and maybe I'll come back another time.
Oh, fantastic. I would love to.